Right, well, thanks for giving us the time today here at Portsmouth Comic Con, Vince. I'm interested in the work you're doing now, which is not completely devoid from comics, but working with the Radisson hotel chain. What's the story behind that, and what's their vision of this project across the world?
What happened was Radisson Red is a kind of new thing for the Radisson brand, and the hotels that are aimed at a slightly younger market. They tend to be built near music venues, and it was a Glasgow design agency called Graven who are doing the design work for these hotels.
Name, isn't it?
Graven Images. So the head guy at Graven, Jim Hamilton, went to the comic show that I had at Kelvin Grove, saw my work and wanted to use me for the Glasgow Radisson Red. Each of the Radisson Reds, they're built in different cities. Jim had the idea of using an artist local to that city for the hotel. So what I've done is I created a bunch of drawings with the architect's plans of the walls, and then they blew them up mechanically. So they're kind of like somewhere between wallpaper and murals,
right.
You know. So in terms of the drawing itself, it's very similar to what I do in comics, but without the storytelling element, or without the story being in a sequence. It's actually more like a mural that way. But it's certainly it's a very fresh approach in terms of when you go into most hotels, they have a kind of hotels have a general feel, and the art doesn't tend to be the selling point of most hotels, and the art in the Radisson Red is something that's kind of fresh amongst the various other things.
Were you giving a free hand, considering it's aimed at a younger demographic who might be a bit more aware of your art and a bit more aware of the looser morals in today's society, shall we say?
You've been talking to the hotel group. Yeah, I was given a very free hand, and free enough that when they saw the original designs, they were like that. Could you put some more clothes on those guys and take the masks off these ones? So yeah, but it worked out in the end.
Well, going from something very modern and very new to something that's been gesticulating for ages, you must have been very pleased when Flex Menlo was finally allowed to be released.
Yeah, I was.
And how did that come about? I mean, was it as simple as waiting for copyright backwards and forwards, lawyers involved, or was it just a question of waiting for the right time?
There was a court case with the Charles Atlas Company. Eventually it ruled in DC's favour, but there was some kind of gentleman's agreement that nothing would happen with it, and then there was a change of management, and eventually, I presume it was Dan DiDio, said, you know what, we should really bring this back out now. And both Grant and myself, we both had talked at the time we were discussing the project before we started it. We both talked about the colouring, and we had wanted a specific type of colouring, and there was something lost in translation between us and the editor and the colourist.
You talk about in the original series?
In the original, series. So because it was coming out again, Grant and I said, you know what, this would be a good opportunity to get it coloured the way we had wanted it coloured in the first place. And it was Peter Doherty who coloured it for the collection, and it's so much more what we wanted.
Isn't it? It really, every page really pops.
I would have been happy if it had come out collected anyway, because it was a good enough story, in my opinion, that people wanted to see it again, or wanted to see it for the first time if they hadn't seen it. But the fact that it came out much closer to the way we had wanted it was just fantastic.
Of course, it gives Gerard Way the excuse to put him in his Doom Patrol as well.
Indeed, yeah.
I'm interested, All-Star Superman, I know you've been asked about it over and over again, but I'm intrigued by the promo art with a much more stylised S, which I really liked, and then how that changed in the final issues.
Originally, Grant had the idea that the shield would stay the same shape, but the S inside the shield would be simplified. It's almost just like you zoom in a bit, so you're just left with two shapes, which were kind of alluding to the yin and yang thing. And originally DC were perfectly happy with that, and then somebody at Warner's said, wait a minute, we've got a movie coming out and we don't want people to pick up All-Star Superman and feel it's something different from regular Superman. And so it was a decision that was made very high up. Just,
and this is Superman Returns, isn't
it?
Let's move on, shall we? Right, I want to pick up on something you mentioned on one of the panels yesterday. You're quite methodical. I think even the other people on the panel, Sean Phillips and Lawrence Campbell, were quite surprised about how methodical you are. Can you talk us through the process with the wonderful example of the bottle city of Kandor, again from All-Star Superman?
Yeah,
you get a script.
I get a script. I read the
description of the Bottle City of Kandor panel.
Yeah, and very, very unusually for Grant, the description of panel 1, which is the big shot of the Bottle City of Kandor, Grant can usually describe something in a sentence. If it's an establishing shot, maybe a paragraph. This was 8 pages of script. And
that would make Alan Moore blush, surely.
Yeah, and the rest of All-Star Superman, it was mostly very concise. So I started reading through it, and Grant's idea was that in the centre, the tallest buildings were like the
council and business,
and the arts, finance, all the
people with the money,
the learning, the banking, all that kind of commerce. Retail, residential, suburban, then parks and recreation round that in concentric circles, and then you had your agriculture in the circle outside that. Then your kind of subterranean kind of power stations areas, and then up into the mountains at the side of the circular jar, and that would help create the ecosystem. And every time I'd seen the Bottled City of Kandor previous to this, it had been a glass dome with skyscrapers inside
no
it.
Particular order.
And sure, this was 8 pages of description, and it would, it went into a great deal more detail than that, but it made perfect sense in as much as having a city in a bottle is going to make sense.
Well, it's world building on a microcosmic scale, isn't
absolutely.
It?
And I felt it was a very satisfying and refreshing and new way of making something that we all already know and understand, those of us who read comics, actually making it seem much more realistic, like much richer,
Oh yeah.
And because I felt like that at the end of the script, rather than think, I've got to draw all this, I thought, I've got a new vision of that thing I've known all my life simply by reading that. And sure, it's going to take me longer to draw it than it took him to write it, and then it takes the reader to just look at it presented on the page. But the fact is, that's what my job is. It's to do what the writer's asking me to do for the benefit of the fans who are sitting reading it. And I'm a fan myself, and I read comics myself, and when people go that extra mile to try and give you something that's worthwhile, I appreciate that, and I know a lot of other people do. I meet them at weekends like this, so
we're still talking about All-Star Superman today, and I dare say for the next 80 years of Superman's life as well. Long may we still be here for
Yeah, of course, we'll definitely be here in 80 years, come on.
But on a sort of panel by panel basis then, how do you sort of approach each page, and how can you speed up that process? What lessons you've learned from the past?
Always the same. I start with the script, I read it and reread it, I do thumbnail sketches in the margins. If I need to spill into sketchbooks or extra bits of paper, I do that. I take the thumbnails that I've drawn, I work out a sequence, I check the sequence is reading the way I want it to. I rough out the pages, and then I draw them up with the final line work. Over the years, I've got more and more obsessed with the storytelling. And it got to the stage a few years ago where instead of doing 1 or 2 thumbnail drawings for each panel, I was doing 6 to 10 for each panel, and then taking all the different combinations, and it just became this kind of compulsive academic exercise for myself. And for years Grant was saying, you know, like, trust yourself, you always go back to your first or second attempt. And I just get into I get locked into this obsession with the storytelling, and eventually when I was working on Jupiter's Legacy, I was getting slower and slower, and Mark said to me, what's the problem? So I explained to him, and he said, would you see a hypnotherapist? And I said sure, and it was one of his neighbours, who was a kind of pretty famous guy in the West End of Glasgow, and had a great reputation.
Darren Brown.
You know him, and I saw this guy 3 times, and I was cured, and I went back to trusting my instincts.